shifting into high gear community. It's been a while since we connected, and Linz and I wanted to reach out and talk about this thing about reframing today. Really interesting, because I was like, we started to record our video and I was like super nervous, right? Like I was like, oh, reframing, because it's such a, to us in our work, it's such a big deal, because there's such a deep healing opportunity available for folks when we start to learn in and feel what it's like to reframe. And so we start recording initially, and literally Linz's computer, like her audio won't work. And then my doorbell rings, and it rings again. My doorbell never rings. And so so we're like, we're starting from scratch. And interestingly enough, as we're starting from scratch, I feel less nervous.
The nerves are gone.
No, it's good. It's all good. It works. It's a win-win. So we're going to talk about reframing today. We recognize, in our work, what we've witnessed is that it can be like the most challenging piece, or most challenging fundamental for folks on a healing journey, because we are so connected. We are so deeply rooted in the stories that we've created. We call them flat tire experiences or flat tire stories. And so we're so deeply rooted. And I was saying to Linz the other day, it's like, I can't tell you how many hours of my life I've spent either sharing flat tire stories or listening to other people's flat tire stories. And this is time you can never get back, which again, I'm creating a story about. But, it's like, if we could only learn to reframe, at a much younger age, and there's never a great time. So here we are. We're going to talk about reframing today.
Yeah, I love it. And just to dial back, because like we said, we were both kind of nervous to bring up this topic. And I think it's one of those things, because like you said, like this is where healing resides, is really in this reframing piece. And for so many of us, we know the traumatic experiences that we've had in our life. We know the big things that have kind of shifted us further away from wholeness or fed into these stories. And as medical intuitives, we always want to get to the root cause behind our disease and dysfunction and ailments within the body. And a lot of getting to the root cause and healing from the root cause resides in our ability to reframe. The hard part is a lot of us want to dive into the big things right away. And that can actually send us further into fight or flight mode. It can send us deeper into our traumas, because we haven't learned how to do this on a small scale first. And so we end up biting off more than we can chew in our healing journey a lot of the times. And so this video today is kind of scaling back and allowing us to get the tools that are required to reframe the small things, the flat tire stories, so that we can build that muscle and work up to have the tools that allow us to feel confident and prepared when we do go to dive into reframe some of those bigger experiences that do hold really strong energetic and emotional charges within us.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing you say is, what we're going to do today is we're going to be like walk, crawl, run, right? Yeah. So, and the walking piece, like in my experience, when we start to just address those flat tire stories initially, separating out fact versus fiction. So that's what reframing is, separating out fact versus fiction. Fact is you got a flat tire. Anything beyond that is a story that you create, right? Flat tire then cause you to lose your flight or miss your flight, that then cause you to miss a speaking engagement, that then caused your bank account to dwindle, that then caused you not to be able to pay your mortgage. Like, what happened is that you had a flat tire, and anything beyond that is the story. And for me, like, I always like to take it back to what happens on a physical level when we start to create these stories, right? And for me, it's like, what happened versus the story that I create. So what happened, the flat tire, is the truth, right? It's the truth. And recognize and staying with the truth supports a parasympathetic nervous system response, right? Versus going into a story like missing your flight and yada, 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 is that what then activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, which then creates eventually can turn into disease and dysfunction, right? And so like, so when we talk about the importance of reframing, staying with what happened versus the story that we create, we're talking about it from the medical intuitive perspective of deeper level of healing, right? And so we're gonna start crawling with experiences that you have pretty much in your everyday, and then you can start to reverse engineer some of the experience, bigger and deeper and longer experiences that you've had, and start to work to reframe those. And my experience is that we're really just starting right here today, and even for me, who's been doing this work now for 7 years or so, reframing was very difficult. I've had some really deep traumas in my life. And had I gone in and delve into reframing some of those really deep traumas from the get-go without support of someone like Lindsay or myself, and whether in a group program or whether on a one-on-one basis, I would have had a tremendous amount of resistance around reframing some of those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, we're crawling today. Flat tire stories is where it's at for now. And I would just recommend that if you are going to lean in and do some of the deeper experiences, that you may want to, call in some supports.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned calling in support, because much of the work that we do, if you've tuned into other videos of ours, everything comes back down to this training ground of abandonment and rejection that we have been on. And that's kind of the birthplace of most of our stories. Is a moment or a time where we felt unsafe or unheard or unseen, which led to us feeling abandoned and rejected, which then led to us carrying these stories or narratives about people, places, things, the world in general. And we're all on that training ground. And so, like you said, like, you've had countless hours either telling these flat tire stories or hearing these flat tire stories. And a lot of times when we go and share those things with our friends or our family members, their training ground also comes to the table. And so now their response to our flat tire story is fueling more of that energy. It's creating more momentum, which puts us deeper into fight or flight mode. Whereas if we work with somebody like ourselves, or someone who has kind of done the work around reframing, they really hold that container for us, where it's like, I see you in where you're at. I see your trauma. I see your pain. I recognize that within you. And they have this way of kind of like stirring it around a little bit or working around it and infusing those areas with love. So it's like we can start to reframe those traumas while feeling supported and taking those baby steps rather than just jumping into it. And like, sometimes we get to the space where we don't even have the comprehension. Like, it's something that's so deeply rooted in us, that we can't even fathom the idea of reframing that situation.
No.
And so really working with somebody to create these foundational steps, that allow us to feel good or safe going into those deeper things. So I think like having people on your team or people that you work with, when diving into those deeper things is really important. And, taking those smaller steps and reframing those flat tire moments, it's about taking accountability. And a lot of the work that we do through shifting into high gear in our H2H program is about bringing it back to self and taking accountability for all of our experiences, and learning how to reframe those small things in a safe way so that we can eventually like teach the nervous system that it's
Safe.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's safe. You're safe to feel uncomfortable. You're safe to feel those things. And so even when we're working with training medical intuitives or working with people who just want to step into kind of their whole selves, we open up this spectrum. And so what happens to us a lot of the time, like 99% of us, is we stop feeling the bad things. We are afraid to feel uncomfortable. We're afraid to feel shame and blame and guilt and embarrassment and abandoned and rejected. And so as above, so below, there's always that opposite reaction. And so when we curb our ability or when we curb our desire to feel those bad things, we also shut off our pleasure centers. And so sometimes it's about backdooring this thing where it's like, can we increase our pleasure? Can we start to feel good about things and play with these different senses within our body? That will also allow us to kind of go into this more uncomfortable phase. One of the things that we do is like talks about biting into a lemon. And so biting into a lemon is not a comfortable thing for your body. Your nervous system flies, your salivary glands go, you get shivers, your body tenses up, your jaw clenches up. That's not a comfortable feeling for the body. But what we're doing is biting into a lemon every day and seeing if we can regulate ourselves. So even though it's sour and even though it's driving these senses within us, can we bite into it and have ourselves be reminded that it's safe to feel this way? So it's kind of the same thing when we talk about reframing, is like, let's touch base on these lower on things that don't quite create such hyper arousal in us, like those flat tire moments. Can we reframe those so that we're teaching our entire system, the mind, the body, and the soul, that it is safe to go into these unpleasant or uncomfortable situations and reframe them so that it comes back to a neutral space? And the more that we create that foundation within us, the more that becomes our narrative, which then becomes our habits, which then becomes our belief systems. And then all of a sudden we go through the world and it's like, wow, I'm not getting charged up by this. I'm not having the same story or narrative around that type of situation. And it really allows our physical body to come back into this parasympathetic state, which, as we know, the body staying in parasympathetic for longevity periods of time is really where health and healing resides.
Right. I like what you said about, the neutral space, right? Because staying with the fact of what happened is a neutral space, right? And it's, for me, it's like when I recognize when the story starts to run, when something happens and then the story starts to run, I recognize I'm out of balance, right? I'm allowing my mind to run away with the spoon, which means my soul isn't getting equal space and my body is not getting equal space. And so it's really about, how can I regulate in this moment? What tools can I call in order to regulate, center myself, come into this neutral space, and then really from that neutral space, be able to go, okay, what happened? And what story did I start to create? And I started to get a visual in my mind. It's like, the deepest level of healing in my experience, and it might shift in the years to come as we continue to do this work, but the deepest level of healing for me comes from reframing. But the choice to reframe is not usually the first one because to me it is the most challenging. We've been holding on to those stories like they're a security blanket, right? We hold on to those stories like it's like, you're trying to take my story from me? No freaking way, right? And so we're presented with the options of letting go or releasing, and in my world, letting go and releasing are very spiritual bypassing ways of doing things, right? Because what I've come to experience, and believe me, I was a spiritual junkie. I did a lot of weird things in my life, learned to play the shooty box and all that fun stuff. And letting go and releasing really appealed to me with the idea that I could let go and release some of the traumas that I had experienced and go ahead and live a whole, happy, healthy life. And I positioned that question to one of my mentors one time. I'm like, okay, so when I let it go, where does it, like when I let things go, where does it go? And he's like, well, it's transmuted by love, by the universe. And I recognize in that moment, what I was doing is I was putting the responsibility for the transmutation to be happening by something outside of me. And, I'm giving my power away, which giving my power away was a very common pattern that showed up in my life. I was extending energy when I needed that great love here. I needed that energy to heal myself. And so what I came to realize or I came to shore up my relationships with letting go and releasing, because what I came to realize is that those things, those experiences that we happen never leave us. They've been embedded, they've been embodied on some level. But what we can do is call up that embodiment of those experiences and work to understand what our responsibility was in creating the stories that then landed on the physical body. And so now we have three choices. We have reframing, we have letting go, or we have releasing. And we can try to flip that magic light switch with letting go and releasing, but every single time in my life, I don't know about you, but every single time in my life when I flipped that magic light switch and tried to take a shortcut to a deeper level of healing, it hasn't worked.
Mm-hmm.
And really and truly, in my experience as a cancer survivor, the one thing that absolutely had a tremendous amount of impact on my healing journey was putting into the practice of reframing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a practice. No practice is perfect. And there are definitely times where my mind will still run away with the spoon. Mm-hmm. But the amount of time it spends running away is much shorter and much shorter and much shorter. And maybe the experience that I've had might be related to one person or two people versus 10 or 15 people to keep, fueling that abandonment and rejection that resides within me.
Yeah,
so.
Totally. And it's so interesting. Like we talked a lot about the mind in that piece there, and always remembering that for most of us, the mind contains very unsupportive and untruthful thoughts around things, because its whole purpose has been to keep us safe. And its idea of what safe is, like I said, is to not feel those discomfortable emotions or those uncomfortable feelings. It doesn't like discomfort whatsoever. And so it creates these narratives that's like, don't do that. Don't get on that stage. Don't put yourself out in that way. Don't do this. That's scary. Your time is precious. It really does like kick into high gear. And so like a lot of what we do is activating those other aspects of ourselves, the sensations of the body, and really leaning into that surrender of the soul and saying like, we're okay. Like whatever happened is what was designed to happen in the grander scale of things. But because of the way that the mind is programmed, it's like we zoom in, we hyper focus on this exact situation. And for that, whatever 5-10 minutes that we have that flat tire on the side of the road, that becomes all encompassing. It's like nothing else matters other than like, I've missed my flight, I missed my speaking engagement, I can't pay my rent, all of those things. Where it's like, if we were to zoom out and have this space of wholeness, it's like everything happens for a reason. Everything is happening exactly as it should.
Speak, Lens.
Our audio is messing up again.
No, pause it.
Yeah. So if you guys notice a glitch, it's because my audio is once again doing something funky and weird, but we're surrendering. We're leaning into this.
The gremlins are in there.
Yeah, we're not going to have a flat tire story around this moment. But as I was saying, it was like, we really want to tune into these other aspects of ourselves and really lean into like the sensations of the body and open up into that surrender of the soul, because that's where this embodiment of the reframing piece is completely transformational in our healing, process. And really taking us from that level of, like you said, wanting to let go or release something, to like truly transmuting that energy, so that when we talk about those things, it's like there's that meme that goes around that's like, the day that I was able to talk about my experience without having that same emotional reaction to it is the day that I realized that I was truly healing. And I think that that's the power of reframing. Is it's not that our stories don't exist. It's not that we're bypassing them and painting everything with sunshine and rainbows. It's saying, yeah, something traumatic happened to me, or something, I had an unfavorable experience, whatever it is, happened to me, but I'm not giving it the same power, like we said, like putting that power outside of ourselves or giving our great love away. We're bringing that back in and using those experiences as a way to, um, show us our superpower. It becomes something that's part of us, that's like, wow, this gave me knowledge and understanding and compassion and strength to continue to move forward. And I'm no longer, um, having the same energetic or emotional charge to it, which ultimately allows our nervous system to calm down and come to this state of like neutral ground.
Yeah. I take it back to my cancer journey, right? It's like, initially you're diagnosed when you're like, oh, I didn't drink enough green juice. I didn't exercise enough, all that fun stuff. And then it's like, you know, not under like, and this is what I remember my mom went through that experience too. She might not have said green juice, but she said other things in support of the idea of cancer being manifested in the physical body, because of what you did or didn't do from an external facing source, right? And it's like reframing that to go, okay, what's my responsibility in the cancer manifesting in my physical body? And I'm going to tell you, I even talked about that the other day on social media, and like people went crazy. They're like, what do you mean there's no way, like, how can you say that? Or, and it's very much similar to when you're reframing bigger experiences or traumatic experiences. How can we say that, this is where this is where I feel my nervousness come up, because it's a sensitive topic, because we've all had, I've had some very traumatic experiences, there's no question. And I had to deeply go into deconstructing those experiences to get to a deeper level of healing. It certainly wasn't easy to search for my responsibility in something that I had perceived somebody had done to me. And so I want to really bring empathy and compassion to folks who are going to, potentially dive into those things and work to reframe and work to deeply heal the body on a level that's molecular. And it's, for me, it was, coming to the realization and owning the responsibility for the disease and dysfunction that I had experienced. Hardest thing ever, but the most freeing thing ever, and yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like this like veil kind of just gets lifted
Mm-hmm.
off of you. Like it's like that idea of carrying that like boulder up the mountain, and it's like just put it down and just walk up the rest of the mountain without hanging on to this boulder.
But isn't it like this, like when you talk about letting go of the charge of these experiences, it's like, I know a lot of folks, I'm working with a lot of folks who've had cancer and disease and dysfunction in many places and areas of the body in all various shapes, sizes, and forms. And initially, the hatred and the angst and the frustration that is directed towards that experience, is, I watch that, and I very much have a lot of compassion and empathy for someone who's coming in and sharing around those experiences. For me, it was like, I could see myself very easily going down that path of creating that story. It's like, woe is me. Why did this happen to me? Like, and then shifting that and even just reframing that to coming into relationship with the thing that, my body has manifested, and even reframing that relationship and shifting that is a very healing experience. So, and when you do that, you witness the anger and the frustration and all of those feelings that are rising up inside of you really start to dissipate.
Yeah. Recognizing that we're our own protagonist and antagonist in our own stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Transformational.
I guess we're digressing for sure. And there are so many layers of this conversation that we could touch on.
Yeah.
But before we end, let's just like really reinforce, like, what is reframing? Reframing is what happened versus the story that I create. What happened is fact. The story that we create is fiction that's created through a heightened level of mind-based functioning, and it activates the sympathetic nervous system, which then takes us out of an organic state of balance and has the potential to create disease and dysfunction, right? So we're talking about reframing right now in your everyday life, those flat tire stories. And then if the invitation is available to you, or you feel like you need support in those areas, you can absolutely go into the deeper experiences that you've had and start to work through deconstructing or reframing, those things as well. It's just a little more sensitive. So we're just crawling here today. That's all.
Totally. Yeah. So call to action is to reframe some of those flat tire stories that happen in your day to day, and reach out to us if you guys need assistance in this. Like, we have a vast toolbox available of ways to really deconstruct those things and support you in that journey.
Awesome. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.